Welcome to week 13. We got Dr. Jene Bramel here to go over the injuries. But before we do that, Matt Waldman, give us a game update here as the Cowboys have come down to New Orleans.
Yeah, it's a fun game because you have the Cowboys with all their excellent skill players and Gallup and Cooper and Lamb and Schultz who can really win one-on-one along with Dak. And so they're really good like matchup players against a defense that's a good matchup one-on-one defense. And they're getting the better of them on that end. But the Cowboys are, they have good athletes, but they're kind of young in certain spots on defense. So as a result, the Saints, who don't have a lot of great one-on-one players right now due to injuries and inexperience, they're winning with scheme and scheming guys open against the Cowboys defense that's a little more prone to confusion. So it's an evenly matched team game from the standpoint that if you looked at the personnel, you'd probably say, oh, Cowboys have a huge advantage. But when you look at the coach and how they draw up the plays and the coaching staff, it's pretty even right now. Jordan Humphrey got in on the act a couple of times, getting wide open on some plays that were either slower developing plays or rub routes. You see Taysom Hill, who's gotten banged up with his finger and then his foot, still going out there and making throws, some wide open seam shots to Jawan Johnson. They hit him. Nick Vannett on a screen play that went well. They got some timely runs. So that's worked out pretty well. And then for the Cowboys side, look, CeeDee Lamb after the catch, at the catch point, Michael Gallup with a nice, back corner fade that was beautiful.
Oh.
Watching him be able to make that play. Dalton Schultz with some timely plays as well. Amari Cooper got a 41-yard shot. They said, it's funny. You can see that the networks are getting told the things that they can't tell anybody until the game time, which is, 5 minutes into the game, they say, well, we were told Amari Cooper is only going to be available for third down and red zone. Something that I think most people would really have liked to have heard before the game, if you thought about whether or not to start him and how that goes. But he got a 41-yard shot, that flipped the field up the seam. That worked out pretty well. It's just going to come down to whether Dallas can make the one-on-one plays on defense or their defense doesn't get confused by something that Sean McVay's group draws up. And it's going to be it should be pretty close.
Yeah, it seems like there's a coherent game plan. Like you said, Matt, a lot of pick plays, a lot of things where they're scheming receivers open for Taysom Hill, and Hill looks up to the task in that context, not being used a lot as a runner, neither running game, getting anything going. And like you said, if there's an edge right now, it is the quality of those Cowboys receivers. CeeDee Lamb looks like he's finna win leagues for people. If he gets enough work, he looks like he's got like a 200-yard day in him before the end of this year.
Yeah, there may be a lot of people who are all excited about Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle and folks like that, and they should very well be. But he stacks up there with those guys at the very least. He's in that same tier, and it was a fantastic class last year as well as this year.
Yeah. Okay, nobody stacks up to Dr. Jene. Let's go through, of course, and I'm just. What a task you take on for us, Doc. And the more I think about it, the more I think about tracking all NFL injuries is just something I don't even know if I would wish that on anybody, but you handle it with such grace. So I'm going to hit you with some questions here. Let's start with Sean McVay, and we can really handle Darrell Henderson and Odell Beckham together. And this is kind of like the Elijah Mitchell situation 2 weeks ago. Should we even care what the team thinks about Darrell Henderson, or should we be looking at those two mixed practices?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both. Sean McVay is usually somebody that he says if a player is going to be available, they're generally available. So I don't know if Thursday's press conference was before practice and McVay was expecting him to be out there and doing a little bit. Maybe there was something more to that, or they've decided that, they know he's going to play. They're just going to put him through a little bit of practice on Friday and he'll be just fine. But I'm a little bit more skeptical about what McVay is saying now than I was on Wednesday. So, for him to be on a wrap around his leg on the sideline on Sunday and not practicing all the way through Thursday has to give us some pause. So Sony Michel is healthy. Henderson has to be doing a lot, and we have to hear a lot of positive things out of LA tomorrow before we're ready for him to go on Sunday.
Gene, the Eagles, almost their entire running game seems to be injured at this point. Jalen Hurts is working back from his ankle injury. He's expected to play, but without Boston Scott, Jordan Howard also dealing with his own thing. I mean, Miles Sanders seems to be the only reliable guy, but out of any of the running game, like for Philadelphia, who do you expect to be active on Sunday?
I think Sanders is going to be active. I'm not ready to rule out Scott just yet, although the back-to-back DNPs are always a concern for a player with illness right now, non-COVID related situations or otherwise. I don't think Jordan Howard is ready to go. He hasn't practiced in a couple of weeks. The knee injury he had is likely to still be a problem for him. I think Jalen Hurts is going to go. He's still dealing with something, but Nick Sirianni really hasn't ruled him out at any point, and Hurts has told everybody that he's going to play and was able to do so, although he was a little bit limited toward the end of last week's game, limping around a little bit. So Sanders was back to a full practice on Thursday. I think that's a good sign for him, and hopefully Scott's able to get back to practice on Friday and get some conditioning in before the weekend.
Gene, Daniel Jones, you had a good bit about him and how that the neck sprain reportedly would keep him out multiple weeks, but he's been in the limited practice. You noted that if Jones will have to prove to protect himself in the pocket, which I think he's pretty skeptical about that type of thing. So, if you could tell me a little bit about really, I mean, I have doubts whether or not he can protect himself in the pocket when he's healthy. So, what's your outlook for him?
I have doubts whether I can get through the rest of the night without adding a syllable to another word, but we'll see how that goes. Skeptical. Yesterday was interesting with Daniel Jones. There was a ton of reports out there, both local beat writers and from both Schefter and Rappaport, that suggested that this was going to be something that was going to be at least a week and could stretch on. And that's something that, they're getting those reports from somewhere, from some sort of sources that know that there's something going on with that neck. And neck sprains are difficult. When I say he has to be able to protect himself in the pocket, for sure, this probably wasn't putting too much stock into the fact that the offensive line out there in New York has been a problem. But to be able to, if he's hit from a certain direction or goes to the ground, that he's got to be able to hit the neck area there, whether it's ligaments or muscles, and they're saying sprain more than strain, so it's more ligament than muscle here, needs to be strong enough to keep him from sustaining any other injuries. So it was then interesting to see him in a limited practice on Wednesday afternoon after all those reports came out, and then for him to be talking to the media essentially saying, I'm a tough guy, I'm going to be able to play, and then limited again today. So I think he's trending towards playing more than what we heard initially on Wednesday, but it won't be surprising to see him listed questionable. And given what we heard initially, someone in and around the team is concerned that this injury is something that he really shouldn't play through just yet. So he's going to have to show something in practice on Friday. Hopefully we'll get something reassuring from the team or Jones himself where he says he's going to play, so that we're not worried about this going through the weekend.
I hope he uses his Duke education well and doesn't play because unless his neck enhances his ability to sense danger, this is a guy who's prone to whiplash anyway in terms of the way he feels the pocket. I mean, I've said he's a fraud since the draft as a first-round franchise pick. He's an NFL caliber player, but I don't want to see the guy get hurt either. And I think that his game, that's kind of scary.
It is. And by the way, Cecil coined a word this week on the show, spectacular. So
is it like spit-take-tacular?
Exactly. And he did not mean to, just like a skeptical bull. I like it. Skeptical bull.
It personifies the player's ability to evoke skepticism, about him.
Right.
So I think it's a new scouting term right there.
I like it.
Probable. Yeah. We'll just say that I meant to say somewhere between skeptical and probable.
I'm putting that in the RSP somewhere.
I'm going to start I'm going to start the petition I want to get it officially added to the NFL injury report.
Yes.
Amari Cooper is skeptical with calf injury. Okay,
that's Will Fuller for sure.
Oh yeah,
that's true. That's true. Wow, that's it. That's the word. We finally figured out the word to capture. Not
that would be more skeptical full than bull.
Skeptical full, not skeptical bull. See, we're conjugating.
Probable.
So now you come up different forms.
Declensions. I don't know. I'm way too far past.
I love it. No, would love this. Okay,
this is great linguistics. Okay, this is going to be a chance, Gene. I know you like these ones. To educate us. Okay, I get to sound smart
After
when I
all
talk
that,
to
you're
other.
expecting me to educate you on something?
Yeah, and it's because we've been doing this for a long time, and it's very rare I can say there's an injury that we haven't talked about before. But I don't think we've ever talked about the IT band of the knee, and that's what Darren Waller strained. I want to say I saw something that it takes a lot of force to strain that part of your knee. Maybe that's why we haven't heard about it. He's not looks like he's not going to play this week. But what about the outlook, or what education can he give us on this injury in a way that might help us forecast when he's going to be back?
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't too worried about this injury. It's really not structural necessarily. Those of you out there who are runners or who are older or both know how easy that area is to get inflamed and how painful it is when you're trying to extend the knee, and especially when you're going downstairs or in a crouched position. But it's not the same as a major ligament in that area that's providing structure and stability to the knee. But clearly, it's something that's been injured enough where it's just too painful for him to be able to move with that joint. I was expecting him to be able to return to practice and play, but for him not to be even seen on the rehab field at this point, all the way through Thursday, it's already been called a week-to-week injury. We know what that means in the NFL. Yeah, I don't see any chance he plays this week, and whether or not he's ready for Week 14 is a hard question to answer right now. Hopefully, we get some positivity through the weekend and in Monday's press conferences after we hear a little bit more about what's going on. I don't think there's any indication yet that we're going to see the Raiders use injured reserve for him before game time. I don't think that's likely to be the case. But when you hear week to week and a player nowhere to be found on the practice field, you start to wonder whether or not this is, if we are a 2 to 3 week situation, maybe that's enough for them to shut him down for a little bit longer. So hopefully they're just taking care. Lots of rehab and treatment this week, and he's back to practice as he was with that ankle issue that he had earlier this season. Back to a full practice next Wednesday, and then good to go.
So talking about another player with, I think what sounds like an injury for older folks as well. I mean, Melvin Gordon dealing with a hip, back, all just a litany of injuries. Also sounds like an old man. But I think Fangio was saying he's 50-50 as of today. I mean, what are your thoughts on him, Dr. Gene?
I'm skeptical on him as well this week, with him being back-to-back DNPs, Javonte Williams taking a bigger role already. And I think both of those injuries, the hip's been a little bit of an issue. I think the back is the other part of that. I mean, I have to go back and look. Shoulder and hip, it's the shoulder. And actually, maybe the hip has been an issue off and on. I think I've heard back at some point over the last month as well. But I think it's probably the shoulder that's going to be limiting in the same way that it's been for DeAndre Swift over the last couple of weeks and what have you. These shoulder injuries are difficult to play through for running backs because you know that they're going to continue to take hits either directly from a defender or from the ground when they're taken to the ground when they're tackled. That's just a tough injury to play through. So might see a limited practice for Gordon and a questionable listing going into the weekend, but it won't be surprising if he's ruled out after Friday's practice.
DeAndre Swift. What about him?
Yeah, you don't really like the rumblings, what you hear from Detroit. Dan Campbell has really been not very specific about where we are with injuries. He's been a little bit frustrated about players that have been on the injury report, but he's not been shy about saying that players are expected to play, including allowing Swift, not that Campbell did, but the team allowed Swift to play last Thursday through a relatively painful injury, and he only played 10 snaps. And then 10 days into this, for them to be calling this a week-to-week situation, looks like it's going to be a multiple-week absence. What we were hearing today was that week 14 is still in question, which tells you he's not playing this week. It's going to be Jamal Williams and hopefully a little bit of Jamar Jefferson as well. But I don't think we're going to see Swift for a couple of weeks. And you're already starting to see some beat writers and a little bit of some suggestions that they may shut him down for even longer than that. And could this be potentially a season-threatening type injury? I don't know that we want to go there just yet, but for sure, doubtful at very best for this week and probably for week 14 too.
Let's go one more round here with Dr. Jene Bramel, and we're getting injury updates around the league. Help us with our lineups. Of course, we'll be back Sunday morning with Dr. Gene to get the latest as we are setting the lineups in the all-important Week 13. I'm going to go there, Gene. I'm going to go there. And you can just say, next question, pass. Is what we're watching with Christian McCaffrey a result of overuse from our vantage point, from what we can tell? Are you concerned?
Yes and no. I'm not concerned about this latest injury. I think there's more going on than when you saw that play happen, it was clear that his ankle rolled, but then he was taken to the ground. And he was kind of pulled back across himself. So what was visible looked like a relatively low grade, low ankle sprain. Not too surprising for him to be kind of hinted at being day to day in the beginning, but that mechanism kind of going back around. You wonder about the health of the bone on the outside. Could there have been a little bit of a high ankle mechanism? We're not going to hear from the Panthers necessarily, but when you're told that there's a 6-week injury there, you wonder if there was a little bit of a fracture in that fibular bone. And that's not something that really should have occurred with that little bit of the moment of injury that we saw in the initial video. But I do wonder, in the same way that we've seen with Julio Jones, in the same way that we've seen with other players that have had relatively significant soft tissue strains, if those if that's going to be a problem for him going forward. So, it looked like when he came back from those injuries this year that he was pretty close to his usual self. He saw some explosiveness around the edge and things like that. So I'm not too concerned about that. This injury doesn't put him in a different category for me. As we always say, NFL is a very traumatic collision sport, and there's going to be injuries like this just through, if the volume is there, it could be an issue for him. But the other thing that we know, and there's been many studies out there, that players that are capable of taking more than 300 touches in a week, oftentimes are less likely to have injuries for whatever reason. They've just proven that they've been able to take that workload before. So this doesn't seem to be anything that would limit his offseason work next year. We'll see where he is, but he would be a player that if you're hearing about him having issues during the offseason, during OTAs and minicamp, soft tissue injuries in particular, then I'd be pretty leery about him next year, because he's already proven that there's multiple years where you'd have expected him to be pretty recovered in between time. And now maybe if he's not, that you have to be concerned going into next year. But for now, I'm not willing to go there with him.
So, Gene, with both DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray coming back, I mean, Kyler saying, I believe yesterday, he's hopeful he'll be able to make it. I'm assuming he'll play. But with either of them, I mean, should fantasy managers be at least somewhat concerned of a setback during the game, a trip to the medical tent? That's a risk of re-aggravation for either of them on Sunday.
Yeah, I think both of them are going to have that risk until they show that they're fully in conditioned and they're outside that risk of concern there. I think we're going to get some information from the team. Bruce Arians will give us a little bit of an indication going into the weekend. Both of those players are going to be closely reported on Saturday morning all the way through Sunday morning. And I'm pretty confident that both of them are going to play. Yes, we're seeing limited practices. They're back-to-back limited practices. It looked like Murray for sure was probably reasonably close before the bye. Hopkins, they weren't going to take any risks with. All of the beat writers seem pretty confident that they're going to go as well. So yes, a risk of aggravation, but I hope we get enough positive reports Wednesday or Friday afternoon through Sunday morning that suggest to us that Hopkins is going to get a pretty full workload and Murray is going to be able to be effective outside the pocket.
Gene, I remember you talked about Antonio Gibson's injury a number of weeks ago, about 6 weeks ago, I think, at this point, and saying that it was likely there was going to be some point where he was going to be out of the lineup because of the nature of it. So could you rehash this injury? Because if it is what you were talking about, seems like Antonio Gibson has kind of shown what people were afraid he didn't have last year. He's shown what people wish Christian McCaffrey had this year, which is the toughness to play through some dings.
Yeah, just working with incomplete information with Antonio Gibson. When you hear stress response and stress fracture in the shin bone, the weight-bearing bone of the lower leg, it just seems like it's a ticking time bomb, so to speak, where that player at some point is going to struggle. And what we called it earlier in the year was not so much a snap-to-snap situation as a week-to-week situation, where in any given week, as we saw last week, you might see a player get 30 touches with this particular injury because he's shown he's been able to play through it. And then there are times where he's going to have to take it a little bit more easy as the week goes on. But since the bye week, Gibson has been showing that he's capable of doing almost everything he needs to do. And with J.D. McKissic fighting through a concussion, we may see Gibson get all of the, maybe a little bit of Jarrett Patterson possibly. But I think we're going to see Gibson take all of the rushing reps as much as possible and then get all of the passing down work probably as well that McKissic won't be able to handle if he's still out with a concussion. So looks like he's made some progress. But again, I think we're still where we were back in week 3 and week 4. We're still seeing limited practice participation. There's still going to be a risk of, if he takes, an unusual hit or anything that might stress that area, we could see him have to limit his practice reps even further and maybe see a snap count go down a little bit. But until we see that happen, it's full systems ahead for him.
Is it possible, Gene? I'm just curious. This is more of a Bloom type of question for you.
Yeah.
That I want to ask here, which is, you've had ER experience, and maybe you can't divulge details necessarily, but I would love to know what's the weirdest, self-fixed attempt at an injury that ended
this ought
up
to be
going
good.
into an ER.
Oh,
Like
this ought to be
somebody who
good.
goes, I have a fractured shin. Maybe I can put some crazy glue on it, or maybe I can, do some sort of weird thing to myself with some, hardware or something that I have around the house. What is something like that that's like, NFL injuries gone wrong, but to normal people?
Well, you got to remember that I'm dealing with pediatric folks for the most part. So, either we've got parents at home that are, kind of rub some dirt on it, and those folks I'm never going to see in the emergency department anyway, or folks that are a little bit on the more concerned side and bringing them in at the drop of the hat. And this isn't HIPAA related at all, because there wasn't, it was more on the sideline. It was a situation more than anything else. But I did have a young man with pretty much had avulsed the whole top of the inside of his gum out a little bit, and wanted me to just put a little bit of something on the inside. He's like, can I play with my mouthpiece? And I'm like, yeah, you're totally fine going back out there. So that was of all the high schoolers I've seen, that was the one that was the most fun. We'll relocate shoulders on the sideline and do finger dislocations and things like that. But that was the one that we still tell stories about and chuckle, where it just, totally torn up inside the mouth. I'm like, can I play with that? I'm like, yeah, you're fine.
Probably not. Probably not.
It ain't gonna get much worse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You aren't going to get any prettier anyway. So
Yeah.
I just like the idea of having some catastrophic injury that may end my football career, but the first voice I hear, the first face I see is Dr. Gene, and I know I'll feel like, hey, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And our fantasy teams are going to be okay. It's funny, Gene. I'm saving one for you.
Not how that works. That's not how that
Right.
works at all. How soon can I go back in? Is he ready to
Right.
go? Can you give me an ETA? Do I need to put his backup in on special
Oh,
teams?
man.
There's no
Even in
soft
high
bounds
school,
of my
huh?
voice on the sideline.
Even in high school. Yeah, I guess the football culture there is pretty strong. But I'm saving the question. Gene, I don't even want to get into it, but there was something going on where I was like, I don't think I need to go to the doctor. And my wife, my wonderful wife, the love of my life, Kate, said, will you please just tell Dr. Gene that I told you to ask him if you need to go to the doctor before you don't go to the doctor. So that's the weight that you have in our house.
Coming up in 2045, Sigmund Bloom showing Jene Bramel his hernia on air.
Right, like Aaron Rodgers style. Exactly.
Look at this.
This discoloration was always there, but this is the new discoloration.
Yeah.
It moves kind of weird now.
Yeah.
That is the time I will put up the clear stop sign. We got to draw the line.
Technical
somewhere.
difficulties.
That's right.
Nah,
Like,
you're
I'll make sure I'm on mute for that. Try to find a way to as well.
It's good. Hey, you take on an impossible task for us. You do an incredible job every week, and you do reassure us and make us feel like at least we're not going in totally uninformed because we have Dr. Jene Bramel on our side. Always. Thank you, sir.
We do what we can, even if my spelling and grammar and syllabification, how about that? We'll add some extra words in.
You're unflappable.
Put a few more extra P's and B's in there for sure.
There you go.
You never know. All right. We got Taysom Hill leading a drive. He's running. By the way, if you had Taysom Hill as your fantasy quarterback this week, even after he left briefly early in the game, looks like it's going to be okay. Up about 15 points already, adding 54 yards as a runner. 13-10 right now. Again, we'll go back to it's that time of year. There's a point we do the waiver wire show every Tuesday morning. When there's a point around week 10 or week 11, usually, when I start saying, fill up your bench with backup running backs. And we rank them based on various criteria. Alexander Mattison's always number one, as you probably would expect. Matt, you had the drop on Alexander Mattison before everyone except maybe the Vikings scouting department, because they were obviously sold on him. They traded down 3 times before they took him. So they knew that he was good, but they knew that nobody else knew that he was good except for Matt Waldman. So give us that refresher as Alexander Mattison could maybe be a league winner.
He could very well be. I mean, the Vikings have one of the best run games in the NFL. I mean, they're up there with the 49ers and the Browns in terms of what the offensive line does and the different ways that they utilize the run game. If you call the screen game part of the run game, which you should, Alexander Mattison's a great screen player. He's someone that just has a wide breadth of skills. And, you know, some running backs are great because they do one to two things extraordinarily well. You know, and then they're on a scheme that can do that. Elijah Mitchell's a great example of a speedster who you put him or Deebo Samuel in that gap game with the toss play where you have Trent Williams, George Kittle, and Kyle Juszczyk, basically the three best players at their position in the run game in the world, and you're simulating punt returns. You know, and that's what happens when you can run toss as much as they do and get that. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have a guy like Mattison who isn't extremely fast, but he's quick enough. He has enough burst. He breaks tackles on a level that's very similar to what you see from Alvin Kamara. They have very similar technique at shedding tackles, strong contact balance, understands how to move efficiently and set up blocks. And when you put all that together, you get a guy who moves the chains. And if you aren't disciplined at getting the right angle and getting your body on Mattison and wrapping up, he's going to break 2, 3, 4 tackles on a lot of runs and extend plays from 8-yard gains to like 20 or 30-yard gains. So he's no Dalvin Cook in terms of breakaway ability, but he's a guy that wears down a defense and it's hard to stop him. He doesn't give you a lot of bad plays. So, you know, in that respect, he's kind of like a young Frank Gore in that sense of, you know, being able to put everything together and give you a great deal of diversity in your offense where you can run any play with him that you have in your playbook and he's going to deliver for you, which just keeps your offense unpredictable as opposed to going, we better have the 3 best, you know, blockers on the edge in the world for us to be able to exist. Otherwise, the other, you know, 18 of the 27 carries we run are probably going to go for an average of 1.2 yards per carry, you know, as you know, and then we're going to survive on one type of play, you know. So most teams don't have that luxury, like the Vikings don't, but what they can do makes them extraordinarily unpredictable and versatile in their run game. And Madison's, there's no drop off in that respect, which makes him very dangerous.
Seamless, like Dearness Johnson earlier this year.
Exactly.
Seamless. The physical traits aren't as important as understanding the concepts and in real time executing them. Chris, if we had a backup running back draft, or otherwise, if you were advising folks, say, okay, I do have an extra roster spot now. You know, my quarterback or through bye, I can draw my backup quarterback. Who's a backup running back that you have your eye on that maybe by the time the season's over will potentially decide fantasy football leagues?
Well, I mean, we were talking about him earlier. I mean, Jordan Howard kind of pops up, but we're hoping to see what his health is going to look like. But I mean, is it fair to call James Conner a backup or running back at this point? I think he's really more the starter now. I mean, we'll see what happens when Chase Edmonds comes back. I mean, and with these high ankle sprains, like who knows if Connor's going to continue to be the starting running back, like even once Edmonds comes back. But I think like those are the types of guys that even before we got to this point in the season that you had to at least kind of throw yourself into the storyline of that opportunity, like coming their way. Like, should they fall into that type of situation, or should the person in front of them wind up getting hurt? Jamal Williams, I think, is the one that really sets up to be that guy, like down the stretch with DeAndre Swift, like coming down, because even before we got to this point where Swift was going to be injured, or even at the beginning of the season, we all thought at the very least that Jamal Williams could at least be maybe a 1B-ish type of role player, because with both his ability to both be at least a decent runner, like out of the backfield, regardless of the type of blocking scheme that they wanted to employ, he's also been a decent pass catcher as well, because we saw him be efficient as a receiver when he was still with Green Bay. And so now with DeAndre Swift like being out, I know that Detroit, I mean, that offense isn't really one that we want to invest a ton into, but at least, I mean, looking at least what their schedule is like moving forward, I think they've got Denver, I think they've got Arizona, and then I think Atlanta, like at some point, like throughout the playoffs. So without too many other options in the passing game for Jared Goff, I mean, outside of Josh Reynolds, TJ Hawkinson, I mean, Khalif Raymond, if you really want to go, you really want to get nuts like with their passing game. I mean, Jamal Williams sets up to be the guy that can take over and have a workload fairly similar to what we would talk about with like Alexander Mattison, but it's just obviously the situation is much better for Alexander Mattison, given the quality of the offensive line, the pass catchers surrounding him, so on and so forth. But if we're just talking about just like raw opportunity, which in most cases, especially at this point in the season, that's just what we want for our running backs anyway. We just want to be able to roster a guy that's going to be seeing 15 to 20 touches. I mean, I take that all day at this point. I mean, because for most folks that are rostering who like Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, I mean, having to figure out like what the touchdown is going to be for those guys. I mean, at the very least, if you can find a guy like Jamal Williams, or we're able to pick him up this past week, we all know what the volume is going to look like. I mean, most folks aren't going to be watching Lions games anyway. So you can probably just throw them in your lineup, see what happens with the box score like afterwards, and then try and at least take advantage of the results as of right now. But I think that's one of the guys that I would definitely say that at least he has the makings of somebody that can save your season as we get into the playoffs. But of course, I mean, with the opportunity, we also have to hope for the efficiency, which might not be the easiest thing to hope for with Detroit.
Yeah, a lot of receptions. I mean,
Yeah.
you could see that. I mean, that's in PPR leagues. He could be a cheap 15-point play, 18-point play just on the 8 receptions for 33 yards. Another Matt Waldman favorite, Jamal Williams. By the way, folks, speaking of Matt Waldman, hopefully you are, if you're listening, a Football Guys subscriber. It's not too late, by the way. I believe we've got it set up now so that we're getting it close to set up where you subscribe, and it's good for a calendar year. So it won't just be for the rest of the year, but don't quote me on that. But look into subscribing if you aren't, because you're missing out on the top 10. And I have to say, close to my heart, Matt, all the nods to the great music this week was wonderful. It was really wonderful.
Well,
the choices of the songs were almost as good as the choices of the player. But speaking of Matt Waldman favorites, and I do believe that I have said that phrase more than anybody else on planet Earth. You led off with a Matt Waldman favorite, who Chris just mentioned, one Josh Reynolds, who has immediately become a starter, 88% of the snaps last week, I think. He knows Jared Goff. They play together for a long time, actually. Is there something there? Could there be a Lions receiver that has fantasy value down the stretch and one that wasn't on the roster at the beginning of the season?
And it would be him because, I mean, you think about the fact that they do have that rapport as far back as LA. And the thing about Josh Reynolds that's compelling is that he really came into the NFL at the end of the Jeff Fisher era. And it was an era that, when just before Equanimeous St. Brown, pretty much his draft buzz was first day type of talent. That's where most of the draft nicks had him. And he wound up being like a late pick, like I think 5th or 6th round pick. And it was kind of the moment, that flashpoint where we said, oh, Des Bryant type of big receivers who run like a limited number of routes aren't going to be in the first round anymore, just on the basis of their athletic ability and production. And I think Josh Reynolds was kind of like an early sign of that, but maybe unfairly labeled as such. Because, they thought of him as kind of a fade route runner on the perimeter who won deep plays, as we're watching Tony Pollard break away a long run up the boundary. And it looks like he just scored to open this game up to a 10-point lead, most likely, as he's shushing the crowd. But, Reynolds is a guy that, survived the turnover with the McVay system and wound up playing in the slot, a big time perimeter receiver who could go up and win balls. Now is playing in the slot and really wasn't used to what he did best at college at Texas A&M. And so now he's with Jared Goff in Detroit. And if you recall, early in the season, Jared Goff threw quite a bit of trust throws to one Quintez Cephas early in the season. So I have a feeling that not only are we going to see Josh Reynolds targeted in the deep game with the double moves that he showed, against the Bears early on and some of those comeback routes and things like that, but I think we'll see more trust throws to him where he could wind up the primary guy. And I'll add that in terms of running backs, there are a lot out there because, I love Chris's choice of Jamal Williams. I think that's a wise choice. But if you're gonna hedge on that by getting Jamar Jefferson, the rookie out of Oregon State, because Jamar Jefferson against the Steelers, no less, looked very impressive against a tough Steelers defense. And he looked pretty good against Philadelphia as both a runner and receiver before he got hurt. And if they decide they want to do the same split that they did with Swift and Jamar Jefferson, both those backs, Williams and Jefferson, can catch. And Jefferson's got more speed, so he can be that outside perimeter space guy. He was very good on outside zone and toss. I kind of nicknamed him Toss at Oregon because that was what he seemed to do best. He was unbelievable at that play. So he's obviously not as hurt. They said he wasn't too hurt after that scoring on Pittsburgh, and he had a high ankle sprain, but he played last week. So they said it wasn't serious before the game. And, of course, Gene's like, I don't trust the Lions any further than I can throw Matt and Patricia. So, with this, not very far. So
throw out my back.
Exactly. So, that's a guy that I would add. Matt Breida would be another one. That's a no, I think that cat's out of the bag. Kadri Ollison might be interesting, only from the sense that he's we're talking deeper leagues here, but like
sure,
Arthur, he had a feature on him. Jonathan Cook is a reader of ours who sent me a link last week about him, saying how ESPN did a story on how he reshaped how he ran, like not running the football, but like his stride and how he used his arms, and went through like the whole movement specialist thing, and like actually gained speed and quickness. And he was a training camp stud this summer. Like he was the guy in Atlanta's, backfield that they were talking about a lot. But then he got cut late. The new staff cut him late because they're like, let's bring in Donta Foreman, let's bring in Wayne Gallman, let's bring in all these guys. And then suddenly they bring him back due to all the injuries, and he has a couple of nice plays against the Patriots. And Arthur Smith's like, I wish we used him more. And then he got sick, so they made him inactive. But with Mike Davis not doing much, Ollison might be a guy. And I would add Dontrell Hilliard as another guy who, another Browns alum, wasn't like Dearness Johnson, not so great. Well, Hilliard was pretty good at Tulane. I didn't think Johnson was anything special at South Florida, but those guys got better in Cleveland. And of course that offensive line is very good, but Dontrell Hilliard stepped in and basically showed everybody 2 weeks ago, Adrian Peterson can do difficult things and make good things happen out of bad situations so that they're not awful, but he's not turning good situations into great plays, which is no different than what Hilliard or Foreman were doing. But what Hilliard added that Foreman didn't have is the passing game on the level that Hilliard looked like what some people, I think, mistake Jeremy McNichols to be. And so Hilliard might wind up being that guy, especially last week, because he went toe-to-toe with Foreman and was the more productive guy. They both fumbled once, but, Hilliard protected the ball well. It was just a really well-placed strip. He's a guy I would keep an eye on because they said when they brought in the two big backs that first week, they said, we're not through looking. Vrabel said, we're still looking at backs. And they brought in Hilliard and Rodney Smith. And if Rodney Smith does something well, then I expect Bloom's cat to speak Portuguese in the next 5 seconds. So,
Feijão.
Exactly.
Thinks this is Pets time now. By the way, more Matt Waldman content, the 20 Drifters. And you named your number one, number two already, Jamar Jefferson, number one, and number two, one, Matt Breida. And then I love how you put Richie James, number three. Richie James can play. Just needs an opportunity. And watch out for Matt's number 5 guy, Brevin Jordan, who's taking over as the tight end. Could it be that Brevin Jordan and Pat Freiermuth are worth more than Kyle Pitts down the stretch? Maybe rookie tight ends.
Surrounding talent, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that Kyle Pitts is being treated like a foundational player. So the curve has already caught up. He didn't even get to have a rookie year to show everyone what he could do because he's the foundational player they're taking away. Okay, we got just a few minutes left, and I've got to go to you on this, Chris, and we're going to check back in on this Sunday morning also, but it's December.
Yeah.
Chris Allen, FFWX. And there are some potential weather games going all the way to the Monday night game in Buffalo. So just what games, I can't help it, are on your radar as we're
It's right there.
It
I mean,
is. Well, and
right
it is
there.
actually the appropriate way to put it. What are the
Yeah.
games you're going to be watching, the weather forecasts, refreshing, updating to see whether we need to change our lineups?
The first one is that New England Buffalo game that's going to be played on Monday night because it's got high winds. I'm seeing like 19, 20 mile per hour winds. There's supposed to be a little bit of light snow in the area as well. So we're talking like, just a wintry, like whether it's rain, whether it's like, just light snow or whatever, it's just going to look bad. And from I guess from a fantasy football perspective, you already have the specter of Bill Belichick kind of overriding this entire game. I mean, Josh Allen against the Patriots, and it's already a matchup that like we just don't want to really dive into anyway. Especially was it week 8 last season when they were on their hot streak. I mean, like he already tried to short circuit that like quick or not quick passing, but just like heavy passing game that they were trying to implement in Buffalo. So we've got that already working against us, and we've got this bad weather against us. So to try and separate the two is going to be difficult for everybody involved. So I know that's going to be one that I'm going to be watching quite a bit, especially given the Buffalo Bills, like their stadium is one of the shortest in the league. While it's not like a massive predictor or anything like that, but because I do have a structural mechanics, like computational fluid dynamics background, looking at just like the natural barrier that the stadiums provide versus like a shorter stadium versus a taller stadium, like that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In those types of extreme conditions, that does become at least something that I look at. So I think it's like only like 110 feet tall, somewhere in that range. So couple all of that with just like the bad game environment that we would expect for the Bills. I mean, possibly less passing, possibly less deeper passing, and Josh Allen could possibly get there on his legs. But I think the biggest concern, I think, for New England's defense, Kyle Duggar might be out for their defense. But otherwise, I just think it already sets up as a bad matchup. So having the bad weather on top of that just makes it at least difficult for us to roster a lot of, even just like the folks past the big names, so, Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, like so on and so forth. But if you were thinking about benching Cole Beasley or Emmanuel Sanders, you probably should have been benching Emmanuel Sanders already. Just
right.
Maybe consider that. But I think that's the biggest one. There's going to be some rain in Cincinnati. I'm just an hour north in Dayton, and it's been looking pretty bad over here like the past few days anyway. So that's not a surprise. And then also out in Seattle as well, a little bit of rain out there, which is fairly normal for this time of year. So again, with the way that Russell Wilson and the rest of the team has been playing, you could probably just
exactly.
you can latch on to any other narrative that you want, and the weather's not going to change much of it anyway. So I think that one's tough already. But I think that's the New England game is the one I know everybody's going to be watching just because the matchup, and then on top of that, you're going to see shots of snow falling or wind or whatever before kickoff anyway. But yeah, I think that's what I'll be watching the most.
Chris, I had a vision of you with scale models of the stadiums and then like a wind machine, and then you can like drop in a little bit of smoke or something to show everybody and see when they're kicking towards this end zone. That's going to be when they're in the first and fourth quarter. If they win the toss and they go in this direction, that's whenever you're going to want to, because we're getting to that point. You're going to have to drop on everybody whenever you can bet over-unders and quarters and things like that, and you understand how the weather plays an effect.
Yeah,
it's going to be printing money.
I've thought about it. If I had the the computational power, just like my rig itself, if I could run CFD solvers or like on my computer and just like have just like the CAD model of the stadiums and whatever, I'd probably post those on Twitter if I could, because the only other way I could do it is if I use the stuff that I have available to me at work, but I can't do that at work.
Yeah.
It's been on my mind though, of like recreating models of stuff like that to show folks like, if the wind is going this way, this is what the stadium's going to look like. I know.
I'm here for it.
I'm just wondering if we can get Julia Bryant to make a graphic of an electric green sleigh around Christmas Eve when Chris does his forecast, and have Fantasy Santa maybe ride in on that.
I like that.
Maybe he could also be a back. He might be a backup. He just might not have had the right setting. He might still. I'm still keeping an eye on that cat for maybe a backup who could come through for you. We'll see.
I like it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And of course, another player featured in Matt Waldman top 10 this week, Ramondre Stevenson, may loom large with that forecast in Foxborough. The forecast here at Football Guys, always, we're going to give you the best that we can give you in terms of analysis, knowledge, and insight into the game that we love so much because we love you so much. We could love getting together, everybody on the YouTube channel, Football Guys, so many shows, so much talent, so many angles to this game, to fantasy football, this hobby that we love. Always, folks, we appreciate that you share the journey with us, that you choose to spend time with us and encourage us to continue to do this thing that we love so much. As always, we love you and stay classy.